Thinking Liberty, episode 23.
Welcome to Thinking Liberty, the podcast that explores lifestyles of freedom-minded individuals. Join us as we discuss work, hobbies, health, learning, and more while living a travel-orientated lifestyle. Be curious, be open, be inspired, be free. And now, here are your hosts, Zach and Sarah Varnell.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Thinking Liberty. We're here with episode 23, where we're going to have another interview for you coming up. But first, we're coming to you from Ackworth, Georgia, and as always, I'm Zach.
And I'm Sarah, and I think the last time that we recorded was when we were in Maine.
Yeah, I think up in Acadia National Forest or National Park on Mount Desert Island.
Yeah, so we definitely really enjoyed our time there, and I'm not sure where we left off, but I really want to go back, so that's definitely on the high priority list for me. But we left there, and we went back to Pennsylvania and spent a lot of time with family, and just really focusing on spending some quality time. We always love our stays there, and we get to camp out in my uncle and aunt's backyard, and that's always fun, and getting to see the cousins and getting to visit the grandmother and then going everywhere else. And yeah,
it was a long haul down to Pennsylvania, but we basically were getting kicked out because everything in Maine was closing. We thought about going to New Hampshire, but everything there was closing. So we just made the trip from Maine to Pennsylvania, which took us like 2 days of driving in the RV, but then we stayed there for about a month. So
yeah, I guess the Northeast gets snow kind of early sometimes, so nobody wants to stay there.
Yeah, no one wants to risk it.
I would have risked it, but anyway.
But yeah, now we left Pennsylvania and we made another long haul all the way down to Georgia. So our RV is parked on Lookout Mountain, Georgia, and we're kind of, ditching the RV for a little bit to come down to Atlanta. Sarah has a conference that she'll be speaking at next week, so we're in town for that. And just here to see, family and friends and things like that too.
Yeah, so really, I guess you could say, the last month and a half or so has really just been us focusing on, work responsibilities and, conferences and things like that. And then also just a lot of family time. It's been really good. We've really been trying to strengthen some of our relationships and just focus on, what really matters at the end of the day. So that's what our time's been about. But so our interview today, we're interviewing Logan, who travels with his family. And it's just really cool because we've interviewed several solo travelers and talked about, the perks and also some of the challenges that go along with traveling by yourself, that Zach and I really don't have that much experience with. So it's interesting to hear the other side of it about, traveling with a partner, but not only traveling with a partner, traveling with your children, because that introduces, new challenges, but also new perks and new rewards based on exposing them to your interests and your loves and your passions. I definitely would say that it's really important when you're traveling with a partner. It can be hard to find somebody that you travel really well with. And so it sounds like he and his wife have a great relationship, and their children are super lucky to have this experience so young. And it'll be cool to see what the future holds for them. And yeah.
Yeah, when Logan approached me about the interview, I was really fascinated by how him and his wife and his 21-month-year-old twins travel. And he said that they would be taking the twins, I guess, would be taking their 25th flight, and they're only 21 months old. And I think as of talking to him, he had most recently visited Norway with the whole family. So he's, not just flying domestically, but he's flying internationally with his kids. And he had some cool tips and tricks on how he does that. And then also, we really got into talking about how, he finances his lifestyle, and he's an entrepreneur, and he kind of got into some of the things he does there and his philosophy on work. And that felt, that was really fun. I agreed with everything he was saying, and it was nice to find somebody who has the same outlook.
Yeah, and he's also working on a book that he'll be releasing soon, so we're very much looking forward to reading that and finding out more about his story and his journey. But yeah, we hope that you guys enjoyed this episode and this interview as much as we did. I definitely learned a lot. So,
all right, so let's go into the interview with Logan Lenz. Hey, Logan, welcome to Thinking Liberty. So what really got me interested when you contacted me about being on the show is that you structure your life, it seems like, to make travel a priority. And we'll talk about it more later, but you even have kids, and it doesn't seem to have slowed down your travel at all. So can you just tell us a little bit about, what you told me, how you travel throughout the years, what kind of, structure you have built up to plan for travel throughout the year, things like that?
Certainly, and thank you for having me, Zach. I appreciate it. It's great to be here. But yeah, certainly travel has been kind of at the forefront of just my everyday, we'll call them goals or milestones, things that I work toward, which was kind of just an open lifestyle, right? Something that encouraged freedom and celebrated the diverse nature of, really what life takes us through. And as we grow as people, we should be expanding culturally and expanding our knowledge, not just through skills, but also through awareness of what other people go through. So ever since, I guess college, post-college, really, I've tried to make sure that I've traveled as much as possible and really diversified those types of, excursions or trips, if you call them, whatever they might be, both between internationally and domestic, and just really trying to get the most out of every single type of journey. So the way we do it, and I've been with my wife for quite some time, so she's always been my travel partner, is that we kind of focus on a really good domestic trip, like what's a city that we feel is kind of untapped, and maybe not the popular trendy ones, but something that is appealing and charming that we can, within like maybe a week, 10 days, do like everything that a local would suggest and more, like almost get the taste of what it would be like to live there. And that's what we call kind of traveling right. So we do that at least once per year, and we've been doing that for it's about 12 years now consistently. And then every summer we do a really big international trip, and that's run the gamut through continents and really kind of spanned the whole planet at this point. So yes, most recent, maybe I'm talking too much, but we try to do domestic and then international, and then partially kind of like we'll call them a staycation or a beach type, because we're in Florida, something that's in our state that is also somewhat untapped, somewhat I guess that makes us feel like our state is still worthy of our existence or our place of home. So we tend to do that, as well as the weddings and the bachelor parties, like all that stuff really puts us on flights, and also business trips puts me on a flight at least once per month, probably on average. And with kids now, we didn't want to interrupt that cadence. And we can get into more of why I wanted to build this lifestyle and what that means to me and why that keeps me going, because I'm business oriented first and wanting to build that lifestyle so that I can not only afford what we're doing with travel, but also be able to work almost more efficiently and productively from the road. So that was a long-winded answer to kind of like how we structure the way that we think about travel in our family.
The more you talk, the less I have to also. So, yeah, and that structure seems about the same as what Sarah and I do. It's like we, have these big trips in mind that we take maybe once a year, whenever we get a chance. But then, we take every opportunity to see other things in the United States. And then if we happen to be, in our hometown for a while, we still try not to get too complacent, and we get out and see things we may not have seen there before. So I really like that
try
outlook.
to see it as a tourist, yeah.
Yep.
So how many children do you have, and what are their ages?
Right, so they are 21-month-old twins. So we've taken 2 big trips. One was most recent that I'm probably going to talk most about if we, kind of hone in on one specific trip. We just went to Norway, and I'm sure we'll get into that. But yeah, since I mentioned how often we travel, they've probably been on, I think we counted up to 25 flights, and that is in line with what I mentioned earlier, trying to get on as many flights as possible, and they just kind of come for the ride. Even, I mean, there's been cases where, almost our friends laugh at it, but like where my wife would have a bachelorette party or something, and then she wouldn't want to be away from the kids, but it would be in a city that would be, kind of fun. So just for the heck of it, I would go with, and we'd go as a family. I'd stay in the hotel, maybe do some tourist things while she did what she needed to do, but at least the kids got to experience. I mean, of course, the argument is they're not going to remember, they're so young, but I mean, we just want to bake that into how we live our lives and introduce that to our children early on. So it's just become our normal, way of doing things at this point, which is what I want them to live as they grow up as well. So
yeah, I did really want to ask about that too, because I don't know, you probably saw it somewhat in the last couple of months. Some travel or financial website published an article about traveling with young children, and they were making points that because of the time and the money and the stress, taking young children that won't remember it, they were arguing it wasn't really worth it and to kind of save it. And I think that sparked a lot of debate in the travel community, and I've seen some great articles both arguing for and against travel with children. So I really wanted to get your take on it, and it sounds like you're just trying to start them young and get their mindset open to it early.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really going to depend on the personality types of the parents, because, of course, I'll admit that there's times where it's super challenging. I mean, especially on this most recent trip, we're going to Europe. It's almost a 10-hour flight, and we have, almost 2-year-olds that have energy and want to run around, and to say that you don't feel like you are ruining other people's flights when they kind of need to both run around and or cry or just kind of cause a disruption, especially on like a red-eye flight, for example, where people are trying to sleep. It becomes challenging, but you have to work together as a team. Like, being that we have 2 kids, it's great that we can take one each between my wife and I and really understand what needs to be done to make sure that it's okay. But as long as you're cognizant of that in the moment, like, I'm very aware of what's going on around me, and I want to make sure that I'm not disrupting others. We'll go to the bathroom with them, or I'll just do whatever I can to eliminate that immediately, and still obviously make sure that the kids are comfortable. But I've heard both arguments. I see both sides. But it's really going to be up to the parents, because, of course, those challenges get outweighed by the experience. And despite those times when, even through the trip, like maybe the kids are off because of the time difference, like they're not on the same sleep schedule, and they're really overtired and stuff like that. It's a challenge in the moment, but then that next day when you get to, hike up a mountain as a family and enjoy the view, then you realize, okay, this type of people that we are rewards this over the challenge that we experienced. And I think if you can weigh those things correctly and kind of just understand the situation you're in, I would always vote to travel with the kids. So we're going to continue to do it. We're going to fight through the difficulties that sometimes it causes, especially because we have a 3rd child on the way. We think about how difficult it's going to be next year, like when we have an infant, and then 2-year-olds that we have to get onto a flight. That's going to be a new challenge, but we are going to accept it, and we're going to do what we can with it.
Is there some trick, like a song or a game, that you use to help make the trips or the flights easier for the kids?
So we've been fortunate enough to, I guess it translated over where the kids were really good in the car, so they fall asleep pretty easy based on probably the motion. And I think that's very polarizing, where not all kids are like that. Not all parents get to, experience kids that get to sleep in the car. So when we first tried out the flights, they're obviously super young, and it was easier because they slept and they enjoyed the motion. And then it was most challenging after probably they hit 15 months, and that's when they get the energy, that's when they start walking. And then we started to think about what you just asked, like what's our go-to? And really, I think, again, the answer is that we've been fortunate where they were behaved and probably not old enough to, like, let's quote unquote act out. So this most recent time, we thought maybe just as a last resort, technology would work, because they've kind of been on a Moana kick, for example. So maybe having an iPad and an iPhone kind of preloaded with, clips and songs would be good. But we had a whole aisle to ourselves on the plane, and then even when you expose those and you have one holding one of those devices each, they tend to want to swap and fight over it. And we found, and that was let's say the first flight, by the time we wanted to take our return flight, we figured that technology wouldn't be the answer. So really the tricks are, there's few. I feel like you kind of just console them, walk around with them, because it's more of an energy thing. But we of course have some toys, and we have there's this really cool watercolor book that they like, so we'll bust those out. But really, other than that, we try and just get through it based on how they're reacting in the moment, which could be anything. And it's not one silver bullet that's going to solve that problem, given whatever the scenario is.
So it sounds like you have to be really flexible and on your feet and just ready to make a last minute decision to do whatever will help them.
Yeah, and I think another tip would be how you strategize your placement on a flight like that. So like I said earlier, we had a whole aisle on this one, and we were just really lucky. But technically, since we have 2 kids, we can't sit in the same aisle if there's 3 seats, because there's a rule with the oxygen masks. There needs to be there's basically a proportion of masks to people, so we always have to sit in different rows. What ended up happening is, when you can't get the seats that you want and you have to sit in different rows, you end up being too scattered. And for us with 2 kids, that becomes a big problem, because then we're in between a lot of different other people. Maybe have to toss a kid to console because they want mama instead of dada, and then you're kind of interrupting. Like I said earlier, if it's a red-eye flight, maybe someone's asleep, and especially if you're on the window, think about the problem of getting up if they have a lot of energy to walk around, and you have people sleeping next to you and you can't get to the aisle. Then what do you do? So you really have to think about that. And then you also have to understand, we haven't gotten to the point where they're 2 yet, where you have to buy a seat and put them in a car seat, which I think would be easier, but they're lap children. So at that point, you have no option but to get up, and you can't be confined and stuck where you are. You need to be able to move around. So I think that's probably the biggest tip, is try and get to the aisle and leverage the aisle so that they can exert their energy as often as possible.
And I don't know if you've planned this far in the future or not. I'm sure you've thought about it a little bit, but do you have any plans for as they get older? Will they just, when they get in school, are you going to homeschool so you can keep doing this sort of travel? Or are you just going to kind of base that around their breaks? How do you think that's going to go?
It's a good question, because it's a hot topic around these parts. My wife is a retired teacher. Ever since we had the kids, she hasn't taught, but she's a phenomenal teacher that I feel like I'm strongly in favor of homeschooling. But then we have so many friends with similar age kids that almost think that that's not going to happen for whatever reason, almost like it's not a good idea. So the time hasn't come where we need to decide, but I think we'll kind of have to see how that plays out, because there's a whole social component. I mean, I grew up in public schools, and I played sports, and I was in band, and you obviously meet a lot of friends doing that. So if we can create the same type of social environments while homeschooling, I think that's a good option. But certainly we will be those parents that encourage maybe taking a few days off for extended weekends, and they'll miss school, and they'll make sure they'll get their homework done. But if we prioritize travel, then we'll always figure out a way to do it.
Yeah, and just anecdotal evidence anyway. Sarah was homeschooled and turned out way better than me. So
That's not true. I was homeschooled for most of school. I think the last 3 years of high school, I went to a public school. But yeah, I enjoyed my experience. I don't know if you guys have questions. I'm happy to answer them.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly have heard both sides, and I would love feedback on. It would really be what you take from your experience and what you suggest for your own children, let's say, because that's really the testament of how profound it was for you, or what you think is the better situation.
Yeah, definitely. I think we're not at the point yet where we're discussing children, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think it'll be, when I have children, I'll learn if I have the patience or not to try homeschooling. But my mom was so patient, and so she actually went to college for teaching as well. So she had that background, and she'd always worked in childcare, and she's just kind of an angel with us, and really set up a good structure for us. So it was good, but yeah, I don't know yet for us.
Right.
Yeah, I think it must be one of those case-by-case things because, we live in an RV and we travel, and during one of our stops, we met a family who had homeschooled, I think they're like 7 children or something like that, while RVing. So I know that wouldn't be possible for everybody, but I guess the temperament of them and their kids were just right to where they were able to make it work.
Yeah, so that's impressive. We obviously talk about the whole RV thing. We just kind of haven't pulled the trigger, but as we have more kids, like I said, we have a third on the way, we will explore at least maybe experimenting with that via like first a trip and then see where that takes us, because there's really no telling where we'd end up. If travel is a priority and we are homeschooling, then that means there's no set anchor that we need to establish, and if that's true, we could do a similar thing. We just have to see how those cards fall.
Yeah, finding the right RV for the number of people and, what you guys need would be the key thing there. Finding the space to have area for them to study, but then also so that each child could have like a little cubby hole that was their own personal space. I think that's, from what I've been reading, is kind of key to making a happy RV home.
Absolutely, yeah. Maybe we'll start doing some research then.
So you also mentioned that, I guess, you were an entrepreneur, and that's how you were able to make all this travel work in both terms of, being flexible enough to take these trips and being able to afford it. So can you tell us a little bit about what you do and, your entrepreneurial experience that way?
Yeah, I'll give you kind of the short Reader's Digest version that kind of has it make sense, because not everyone does have the flexibility and the freedom to do what I do. And really my mantra over the years has been make every day different. And it's really because I strive on diversification, whether that's through the ventures that I'm a part of, or investments, or just trying to keep every day where I'm on my toes, right? So in college I started my first company. It was really a good timing type of thing, where I was starting like an organic marketing social media company before social media was really a thing. So we got a lot of contracts with some cool companies doing like blogging and Twitter posts, and really made a business out of that. By the time I graduated, scaled that enough to use my own team to develop a few ideas and applications. Sold some of those. Some were successful, some failed, but really that was then the start of just the freedom taking over, where I could take a back seat when necessary, do more consulting and mentoring, and then really just live that mantra of what project do I want to work on today, and making sure that while I tackle everything I need to, that everything is just still exciting for me. So over the last few years, been a part of other ventures, but still kind of doing that same thing, where I dabble in a contract with a client, let's say in the morning, focus on writing in the afternoons, but that will vary every single day. So yeah, serial entrepreneur, just looking for new problems to solve and just keeping my brain fresh, really. So
is that pretty much anywhere in the IT space, or are you still in marketing, or what's your specialty?
So my LinkedIn headline is I make websites make money. So I've kind of leveraged that online marketing really from like an organic side, as kind of the core of my abilities. And I take that to businesses that need help monetizing or creating a revenue model, and or just looking for community building, or what's their brand voice, right? So yeah, that's really my specialty, but that's also allowed me to dabble in investments and other things that really are just exhaustive throughout business. But like I said, my specialty remains in kind of like the organic digital marketing space.
Okay. So do you have any of your own projects where you're doing sort of blogging or social media or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, my own projects kind of get lost in the client projects, and that's intentional. I want to treat my own projects as if I'm paying myself and can fire myself, and if I'm not doing a good job, I will, pay someone else to do it or fix whatever I'm doing terribly wrong. So, being that they're one and the same, I have a lot of ventures that I'm excited about that I'm happy to share. One of which is a auto part technology that sells auto parts online that connects buyers with sellers. So like dismantlers of, let's say, totaled cars, they'll put their inventory up on our marketplace, and then we have a ton of auto repair shops that really just pick and choose what they need and get that to the customers. It's a great ecosystem, so really bullish on that. I do blog every day, and that's kind of always been a constant for me, although I'm not super regimented. That's been a part of my regimen where I'll make sure I write. That's kind of like cathartic for me. And I also trade and invest daily, so that is a big focus for me currently. And then I have a few big projects, some of which are actually exciting for me and kind of new, because I built a health technology that we're going to market with pretty soon, which is basically like a benefits administration technology. I don't know if I can drop names of competitors, but if you know like Zenefits or Gusto, like payroll and HR, that's kind of that wheelhouse. And there's some other minor ones, but like I said, diversification is key. So while it sounds like there's a lot on my plate, I am really good at delegating, automating, and kind of figuring out what the goals should be and how to best get to them as efficiently as possible.
So right now, do you have employees also?
So I used to, and I built a culture that since then that suggests that that's not the way, because I'm kind of a micropreneur, I call it, which is build like a very small business and then either outsource or find some team or some specialist that, even if it's a consultant, that can kind of take that and run with it. And those are always going to be a contract basis. So I have ventures that do have employees, but they're not fully owned by me, and the ones that are owned by me, I don't. So hopefully that answers the question.
Okay. So you're used to working with people remotely, though?
Absolutely. I actually only encourage that in my writing for any business, and when I do have a consulting gig where it focuses on brand and culture and understanding like what's the vision of the company and what's the why, I focus on what's the goal and what's smart work versus making sure someone's just in a physical location where you can micromanage them. That's not the answer. So a lot of what I preach would be based on distributed workforces that are the best people that are fit for certain positions, but also communicate amazingly and openly so that when there's a problem, it doesn't matter that they're not in the same room. So the parts marketplace, we have a remote team there. We have a WordPress plugin that we built, and we although they're freelancers, we make sure that we post on like we work remotely, and we find the best candidates regardless of their location. And then everything else that I do, obviously, I'm just looking for the best person, so it doesn't matter where they are. And we use tools like Slack and HipChat and Asana and Trello, you name it, just to make sure that we're always staying on pace and hitting our goals. And that's really all that matters. If you're doing that, then our remote workforce is always going to win. It's less cost, it's most efficient because the employee happiness is going to be elevated, and that encourages better work and just all around a higher quality of life. So my lifestyle, I want to breed onto anyone that I work with, and if they ask me the questions that you're asking me just in conversation, I want to be able to tell them, hey, you can do this too, because I figured out ways that while on the road, if you put together your own schedule, you can still get your work done and be super valuable to the company. And if you put that in the forefront, no matter what, like what is my value, and you keep that in top of mind, no matter what time of day it is or what the task is, you're always going to satisfy that employer. So that's always something to be reminded of if you're in a distributed team.
Yeah, it's really encouraging to me to see more people moving to remote work and distributed teams. But it really blows my mind that it's not happening faster, because, sometimes I just see these companies where everybody's working in an office or even in a cube farm or something like that, and it doesn't seem very good for morale. And then also it seems completely pointless. I've been to client sites before where we go and we sit in their office, and then we remotely connect to a completely different site. So it's like the only reason for us to be there is so that they can, walk by and see that we're there and feel good about it, when we could have gotten the same work done probably more efficiently from our house. So
if you look at
I'm on board with everything you were saying.
So a little bit about that. If you look at the trend of how remote work has kind of taken over as the standard, not the standard, but like there's startup culture and then there's enterprise, right? And if you look at both curves separately, you'll see that startups have always encouraged it. They've always looked for the best talent, and location doesn't really matter. Yes, some of them will prefer, depending on the type of role, that person's there, especially if it's a small team or they're like head down doing scrums and building something like day in, day out. I get that, but it's definitely a hockey stick of startups encourage it. But the enterprise side, you saw the trend starting to take over in the last, I would say, 7 years probably, where that was becoming somewhat accepted. Not just the hire fresh new employees that would be agnostic of where their location is, but also allowing local workers to call in and say, I'm going to work from home today, and having that be no problem whatsoever. So maybe on a Tuesday and Thursday every week, it became normal that they worked from home. Then it was about like a year ago, New York Times posted something, and it had Deloitte and GE and some of the bigger companies that have encouraged what I just mentioned, which was like the few days a week where maybe some of their employees would say, I'm going to work from home and I'll check in, at 12, we'll have our conference call and all that. But basically they used data to say that all those employees were being less productive, and it wasn't allowing them to be the company that they aspired to be, and that they needed the camaraderie and the synergy to be location based. So they were going to axe that no matter what. Like their policy was going to be, if you call in and you say you're going to work from home, that's a sick day. You're taking a PTO. Sorry, because I guess there was a few stories that was referenced in the article that, and it's probably it's an employee problem, right? Like they called in and said, "Oh, I'm going to the Hamptons this weekend, so I'm not going to come in on Friday." Like if you have the audacity to actually say that that's what you're doing, you probably shouldn't be working remotely anyway. Now we're seeing it down to, like, if I were to poll enterprise companies, it's almost like frowned upon within the last year. At least that's my sentiment. And I guess it probably depends on what area of the country you're in and what type of company you are. But I think now you're starting to see a closed door on the enterprise, where now they want local, but startups are kind of ignoring that and thriving. And I hope to see that continues to be the trend on remote work. And we'll see where the next 2 years shake out. But I hope remote continues to kind of be the breadwinner in this argument.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I've heard of some companies even who were distributed teams and then did away with that and said, move to whatever city and start working in the office, or you're let go. So yeah, it's not, I don't like that trend of it starting to kind of backslide a little bit, but it seems like maybe they were trying to fit the remote work into their existing sort of enterprise model, and that doesn't really work. I think when you kind of build off remote work and distributed teams and hiring people from all over to begin with, maybe it works better. And I know at least in the company me and Sarah work for, it's in information security. And at times in information security, there's been, like a negative 2% unemployment rate, where there are not enough people to fill the jobs. And it doesn't make sense to only pull from people in, the 25 or 50 miles around you, but it makes sense to, reach out all over the U.S. or even all over the world to find the best talent.
Yep. And I think what's in line with this conversation, and I told you I built something in the HR space, so I've been doing a lot of research on like what's normal for employee benefits, let's say. You start to see the startups that encourage remote work are also the ones that really, really celebrate employee satisfaction, and they'll give gym membership, pay for cell phones, give unlimited PTO even, which is somewhat now being a polarized discussion. But that's the type of culture that I see thriving, because that's the goal-oriented, results-based company that will always look at that versus is that person checking in at 9 a.m. every morning and leaving after 5 and just kind of being a ghost worker, just because they show their face, that's good enough. So we're going to see how that goes, but I think the ones that are really taking care of their employees with a lot of benefits are the ones that are going to win the better talent, and I think that's when it's going to topple over.
Yeah. So moving on from work, you'd mentioned your most recent trip was to Norway. Was that right?
Yeah, we just got back a few days ago, so it's really good.
So is that the trip that you said that you had some things to talk about?
Well, yeah, of course, it's not only top of mind, but I think because of the kids' age, it was the most challenging.
Okay.
So we went for about, maybe it was 11 days, but 10 or 11 days, and we basically spanned the whole, I call it the whole country. It obviously wasn't, but we hit the main spots, and that meant we were very active, and that also meant that there was a lot of car time, which meant that the kids might sleep when the parents weren't, and then we were kind of like, it became a challenge on like the sleep schedule stuff, but yeah, it was I'm happy to answer questions, but it was a testament to the fact that we're getting a lot of feedback and questions of, I can't believe you flew, and how did you fly with your kids for a flight that long, and then stay with them in a country where you don't speak, primarily they don't speak English, and really just like allowed your life to be there and still remain sane for that long. And that's the type of stuff that we want to show to other young parents and anybody that aspires to travel, that you can do it, and just kind of refer to what I mentioned earlier, where you just have to overcome the challenge to realize on the other side is your family being together and having these experiences that are once in a lifetime, and that should celebrate the way that you're building your lifestyle. So
overall, do you think even with the stress that it was worth it, and would you do it again?
Yeah, I mean, you look at it in two different ways. When you're in the situation, I think in the moment, depending on how like hot-headed you are, I guess it really doesn't matter. There's going to be a point where you're like, okay, this isn't worth it, but it's in that moment where you're frustrated and it's just, there's no answer, there's no solution, and just it's stressed and you're not getting sleep. I mean, whatever the scenario is, it's just not ideal, and you're always going to let that bleed through. But then when you think about it and then you experience that next moment that is the complete opposite, it becomes worth it. So if you can get through those problems, and there might be parents that experience those issues in that moment and just say, I'm going home, like I can't tolerate this is too much. And I think that's what's going to like separate those personality types that can travel and cannot. Because if you have the patience and you're willing to see through to the the light at the end of the tunnel, then you're going to feel like, and my answer to the question is, that it's always worth it.
So when you're planning these trips, are you kind of looking ahead and trying to pick and select child-friendly activities in advance, or do you just kind of get there and see what's available and see what's open to do?
So it's a little bit of both, because you want it to be exciting, and kind of you want to roll with the punches. Like if you go into a city where you think, based on TripAdvisor and the book that you read to prepare you, that you have a certain set of things that you're going to do, but then it becomes like once you're there, just everything feels different. So we did have a plan. That's obviously like what spots we're going to hit, what hotels we're staying at, just so that we don't completely, go rogue and end up sleeping in the car. Like you have to be obviously prepared and mature enough to make sure that you have a place to stay. So we went that far and then kind of let everything else play out, which is you get to a spot and then you realize, okay, based on how much we traveled, like were we in the car for a few hours, did the kids nap? Then you have to decide how to shuffle your day around. And when you have kids, that means what's a park or where is a short hike or a trail that we can go to first before we try to eat lunch or try to go to that attraction where we're going to have to carry them, and they're going to, if they don't have their energy exerted, they're not going to be tired enough to allow us to carry them in our little we have a twin go pack that we wear them on the chest or the back, just to make sure they're not like falling off cliffs or running away into the street, stuff like that. So that becomes a huge asset to have with, as long as you strategize that energy thing. It's all like an energy equation. Like, do they sleep enough and do they exert their energy? Combine those together to then figure out what the next activity should be. And it's always going to be fluid. It's always going to evolve. You might end up eating dinner at 5 just because of the way the day went and didn't go as planned. But you got to, accommodate everybody's emotions in that moment. So it really depended on the day, but certainly we have preparations and plans, but sometimes that, varies and changes.
Okay. Yeah. So I've never traveled internationally with children. So if any of my questions seem kind of obvious, I apologize in advance.
No, not at all.
But would you guys, or have you guys ever stayed in hostels with the children, or would that kind of seem too risky? Or
Yeah, I mean, I think we're at the point where comfort and I don't want to use the word safety, but like, of course, being a family that can use Airbnb cost effectively and look for hotels that we know won't fall through. I mean, it's just easier when you do your due diligence ahead of time to pick those things out. So that's just always what we end up doing. So we haven't experienced anything other than, I guess, the difference between an Airbnb and a hotel. So those were our main. I mean, we only stayed like 10 nights, but I would say the percentage breakdown would be 80% Airbnb. I think we only stayed at a hotel 2 or 3 nights. So Airbnb becomes a huge tool for like the types of travelers that we've become, because I feel like not only do you look at what area and location of that specific location, but you also look at is there the homeowner there? Can they maybe help us with tips? And it's just kind of an experience type of thing where you become a local, and you have to consider that as well. So no hostels or anything other than Airbnbs and hotels.
do you find that your kids adapt better or have better moods when you're staying in an Airbnb because it's more homey, or is there a difference versus a hotel?
It's a good question, because I do see myself trying to read, their reactions, because every day it's not something that they can get used to, right? Like when we're home, and they know what home is. But when you go to a new location every single day, and then you say, "Okay, you're sleeping here," they're not old enough to understand what that means. So just the fact that it's a new location means that it's somewhat scary. They're not comfortable. So I don't know if there's a difference between Airbnb and hotel, for example, on the surprise, this is a new place. But really what you end up doing as a parent is kind of like walking through the door, putting them down, and letting them just discover, right? Like, what's how big or how tall is the couch, and can they climb it? And then once they do that, and they start to feel like, okay, I'm allowed to do this, so this must be a version of home. So then they start feeling comfortable. So that's really like the best way to do that. And of course, when you look at Airbnbs, you want to see what is, not that there's a hominess factor, but you look at the pictures and you want to make sure that there's nothing that's going to derail the acceptance of a child's comfort in a new location.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that because we've kind of put together a list of things that we always check for in Airbnbs when we stay, just for our comfort level. And then we travel with a pet, and they can be kind of fickle with their moods too. So we always check for certain things. Is there tips or a certain guide that you use when you're looking through the photos of Airbnbs?
I mean, I think I should first answer that my wife's way better at booking. So I try and let her do that. So that's probably going to be the most important component to my answer. But secondly, I would just say that we obviously leverage the reviews and the feedback. And then just, like I said before, I think it's like a hominess thing where does it feel like there's enough sunlight and you just kind of like have the lounging or sitting by the fire vibe, depending on obviously where you are, but like where you can see us there and it just looks comfortable. I mean, I think that's the grading scale we're using, as long as the reviews and the location makes sense.
So did you notice that your kids also experienced any jet lag, or was that something because of their age, it didn't really affect them that much, or maybe it affected them more?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on how you look at jet lag, because I know there's different measurements of, okay, it's just like the sleep schedule being off, or like the effect it has on, grogginess and just like your ability to think. And of course, you can't measure those things in children, but you certainly do see them being completely off schedule. And that's probably the biggest hurdle as the trip plays out, is that maybe they're not sleeping in the hours that they're used to, and because of that, the timeline that we laid out for all the daily activities then goes awry, and you have to kind of then pick and choose your battles, where maybe they're waking up way earlier than they were at home because their internal clocks are different, and thus we need to start our days earlier, and maybe the hotel breakfast isn't open at 5 a.m., so what does that mean if we have to check out that early? Where do we go? What do we do? And that really just then dictates how the days go. But that's the biggest thing that you observe as a parent, is you just have to accommodate the way that it affects really like the sleep behaviors throughout the day, and really the energy preservation as well.
Okay, and how does that, how does it make it easier or more stressful, with you guys also having jet lag and they have jet lag? Are there any like relaxation things that you guys use to help, or just working together as a team?
Yeah, I mean, there's not something that we go out of our way to do, just because I feel like our agendas to make sure that we see, for example, like all of Norway on this trip, you're always on the go, so you don't have time to, kind of think outside the box or do something that isn't the activities that you wanted to do anyway. And I think that's probably the best solution and remedy, is that you still just have to let them adapt, because it is almost it's unavoidable in a lot of ways. They're just always going to be somewhat off, given that there's a time difference and just a different place, and that comfort needs to slowly evolve. And I would say that by like the 7th or 8th day, it became better, right? Like it's going to slowly get better. And I think it's a challenge, but I think that's the only way to do it. Like, did I not get as much sleep on the trip than I do at home? I would say yes, but it's only because you're thinking about the ways that you need to accommodate the difference in your own timeline, and how really the kids take precedence. And if their schedules are different, then maybe I can't stay up till 12 to, check email, right? Like it's at midnight. So like that type of stuff, you find yourself balancing and accommodating the kids. So I don't know. It's a different and difficult thing to balance, but you kind of have to just go with it.
Did the daylight in Norway make any difference? Like, did you have any of those days where it's light until like 10 o'clock at night or anything like that?
No, I think it was somewhat normal. I think it's maybe the time of year, but yeah, I mean, like 7 or 8, it got dark and it was always light when well, that's not true. Sometimes we woke up at like 5, and of course it was still dark, but it was somewhat normal as far as the daylight during the days. So that wasn't a part of the issue at all.
Yeah, so it's good to keep in mind too that, when you're traveling, if you're, worried about that sort of thing, just look at what time of year you're going and try to pick a normal time frame for your kids too. I'm sure that made it a little bit easier.
Yeah.
Have you ever, in any of your travels, have you ever been in a situation where there was an experience or adventure that you and your wife really wanted to try, but wasn't child-friendly? I mean, would you, or have you ever had to consider finding a babysitter where you were, or anything like that?
I'm trying to think. I mean, I don't think there was ever an activity where we can't wear them into. I mean, I'm trying to think of a place where we'd want to go, because we do a lot of outdoor stuff, and like hiking, of course, you can always just put them on your back, and regardless of how old they are, as long as they're light enough to carry, and just do stuff like that. And that's always been the stuff that we've focused on, rather than anything that would disallow them. But I think the two things that come to mind is probably because it's the most recent trip, is that you have to look for restaurants and like where to eat that will not only not be a distraction to, like, if it's like a fine dining establishment, you don't want to ruin the experience of the other consumers. So it becomes often an obstacle to figure out where locally is a good kid-friendly food establishment, as well as kind of like what you do throughout the day that is going to be where can they walk, or can we wear them? And I think that's something you have to, I don't know, we read a lot of reviews really, but the other thing that comes to mind, where something that we weren't able to do, is really just because of our own abilities, and we tried to go on a really exhausting hike, and we weren't able to accommodate the entire hike. But it's partially because of my wife's pregnancy, as well as we had the kids on us and backpacks, and we didn't realize how difficult the hike was. So we've never actually turned back from a hike like that. So I think that was one example where we tried to do something, and whether it was the kids or just our own inabilities, we weren't able to do the things that we wanted to do. But like generally, like to span the rant answer into, or just like to condense it into one simple thing, it would be that I think everything that you'd want to do is accepting of children. You just have to understand the surroundings and be aware that you're not ruining other people's experiences. And that's the part that I think weighs heavily most on me, at least.
So it sounds like you guys are really, conscientious of where you're going and what you're doing, and planning things that are good for your kids, and it will help them to really enjoy their experiences, but also so that you're considerate of other people who might be on vacation or having a nice evening out. Does it ever like frustrate you when you guys are being super conscientious, but then you go out somewhere and other families might not be?
Yeah, I mean, you'll always get looks, but I think the overall percentage of the ones that are accepting, and that might be like a family that's sitting next to you at the table over, that smile and that like kind of play peekaboo with the kids, like that always trumps the few that might like under their breath say like kids shouldn't be here or something like that. And we've had both, but we always end up having great conversations and smiles from the ones that not only think our kids are cute, but also might even get into a conversation of, that's really cool that you're from the States and you're traveling with the kids. That's amazing. And we've gone on hikes where we shouldn't have been able to do the hike even on our own, and we wore the kids, and we got to the top, and people are celebrating the fact that we're not only traveling and doing this with the kids, but that the kids get to say that they were atop this mountain and they like accomplished that hike. And that's, again, what you go back to as a parent of why you want to do this in the first place. So, yeah.
So does it seem like the kids enjoyed this last trip, or is it maybe still a little too young to be able to tell that sort of thing?
Well, I think you have to measure that kind of by day and also by behavior as the moments happen. And I think the easier one to measure would be, like, in the moments, how many times are they smiling or being exposed to a new thing and then getting excited about it. Like my son, actually both of them love cars and boats and trains, anything that moves really. And we went on, a boat ride, and we obviously are in a car a lot throughout the day, and they get to look out to the other cars. And we went on a train. So like in those moments, you see so many smiles, and they're just so excited. And that's, again, what drives you to making sure that you continue to do this as a family. And then you also measure the fact that when you get home, they're going back to the standard daily routine, and they're starting to, you almost get to read the fact that maybe they liked going to a new place every day, and not that they're going to be, post-vacation depressed, but, you kind of feel like they were starting to get into the routine, and now they are home and they probably don't understand it, but they might be a little bit confused and upset that they're not going on as many adventures, right?
So I'm sure that you working for yourself and remote work makes it way easier to not only travel, but to spend time with your family. And you said that you were good at delegating too, so I'm sure that plays a huge role. But do you have any other tips and tricks just for anybody who may, be working or owning their own business to help free up time just to spend with the family rather than having to focus on work so much?
Yeah, I think it starts with your own self-awareness. You need to know what your strengths are, and I'll plug a friend's company that I got into recently, and maybe you know about it because they're starting to get really, really popular, but Panda Planner has been a huge asset for me in my life because I've always kind of been a to-do list guy, and then I would make sure that the night before I focused on what's the goal of the day and then what are the tasks to make sure I reach the goal. And the Panda Planner is like a whole different structure. It's basically a physical notebook where it lists out like it actually makes sure that you feel fulfillment first and foremost. So you list out what are you grateful for, and you have to remind yourself of that every single day by writing in it. But then you specify what are your goals, what are the tasks, and you actually lay out, rather than like relying on Google Calendar, for example, you write out and you remind yourself of the things you need to focus on. So that's one of my biggest tricks now, is that even though I've changed the way that I structure my days, because I used to be a to-do list guy and then I used to be an Asana guy. There was even a time where I used to be an inbox zero guy where I would put all my tasks into automated emails and then only focus on my inbox, which now that I think back to it is probably not the best thing to do for me, but I think there's personality types that do that really well. But for me, like fulfillment and self-awareness and knowing like what I need to prioritize, that I need to think about and be very cognizant of what's most important. And Panda Planner is like the manifestation of that thought into an actual book, and it allows me to truly understand what needs to get done. And I don't know, so that's been a central component recently, so it's top of mind, and I love what they're doing, so I'm happy to plug them because I think everyone should try it out. But other than that, leverage the abilities of others. I mean, depending on what you're working on, if you're in a big company, it's a little harder, but if you're doing your own thing, actually talk to people, tell people your idea, tell people what you're working on. Don't be that guy that wants to keep that closed, because the more conversations you have, even though you think they're stealing your idea, they're not. They just want to help you. And the more you ask for help, the art of asking is so undermined and not taken advantage of as much as it needs to be. But have those conversations so that others can help. And then if you have the ability to do it, pay people that are better than you at certain things to do the things that they will do to allow your business to be more successful. It's really not that difficult, but you need to focus on what you need to do first, and then work outward from there and make sure other people are doing what they are most valuable and to benefit you, and vice versa. Like, how can you benefit others as well? Should always be a part of the equation.
All right. So looking back over all your years of travel, do you have any maybe best experiences and worst experiences that you could share?
Wow.
Or just anything that comes to mind, really. Just any good stories to share with us?
I mean, there's always it's always a funny story to tell friends when they ask, because of course everyone calls us like the traveling couple, and I think there's a lot of friends that go to us when they say they're looking to travel and do like a big trip, and they ask for like, where would you go, because you have experiences. And the story that always comes up after trips, and it's not necessarily like a bad, or I mean, it's certainly not a good thing, but there's always because we rent cars, of course, are we going to find a gas station stories, because we've run on empty like more times than you think. And there's one story in New Zealand that is just, it's hilarious. It's probably not that great through like podcasts, but in the moment and then in person, we tell the story that we passed more sheep than you can imagine, and no humans within like a few hours, because it was just so remote. And we found like this one, it wasn't even a gas station. Like, I had to almost like chug my way to stop next to it. And it was almost like a gas tank that I figured out how to pay for. It was just such a strange experience. And I only got like enough gas to then get to like a city. But those moments are insanely stressful and nerve-wracking when you feel like, because what happens if we do run out of gas? Like, our cell phones aren't working, maybe not. Like, these are a few years ago when we didn't have international plans, and there's no one driving by. So like, what happens then? Am I gonna have to run and like leave my wife in an abandoned car and get help? Like, that thought crosses through your mind too often for that to probably be the horror story that I would tell most. It gets more hilarious if, like I said, we're in person, sharing a beer or whatever. But I think the best experiences are, I don't know, I mean, doing the things that others like aspire to do, but doing them in a way that actually celebrates that moment. I mean, when I say we do a play, like when we went to Norway, for example, we did every single stop, and we wanted to make sure we did all the cities, and we weren't just like going to a city and then doing that one tourist thing and saying, hey, we experienced Oslo. I mean, we would go to the local favorites, and we walked almost the whole city as much as possible, and we do it hard, and therefore we can come back with the experiences and the recommendations that actually are meaningful. Whereas I feel like the norm is to just go, and then maybe they have a good hotel, and these travelers just experience the bare minimums. And I mean, I think that's the best part, is just entrenching yourself into the local scene and truly getting the full experience. It's always going to be what I strive to do.
Yeah, with the gas thing, I think we get especially spoiled, like you living in Florida, and then we're from Georgia, where you can be on the interstate and like every exit will have a gas station. And then when you get into other parts of the country, and especially other parts of the world, that's just not the case at all. But we're not really used to that type of thinking.
Absolutely. It's a strange thought. And the other component to that is that, especially in a foreign car, I don't know how to read the actual like gauge, like the odometer, and that becomes a problem, because there's not necessarily like mileage trackers or percentages. And then that New Zealand story, there was like 4 blocks, like quarterly grades of how much gas you have. So when you got to that final block, how am I to know if it's completely empty or that we have 25% left?
Oh yeah.
So like that became part of the issue, and we were on that last block for way longer than we should have been, for sure.
So what sort of advice would you have for somebody who maybe at this point has a conventional job and has kids and wants to travel more, and they're ready to start making changes to work towards something like working remotely and having the flexibility to travel? What would you tell somebody like that to get started?
Yeah, when I get asked that, I really try to focus on fulfillment first. Self-awareness is also a part of the equation, but really like value of a person. And if you want freedom, it's going to have to be dictated by your employer, unfortunately. And if you're not going to look at that long term, like there's obviously the people that get employed throughout their life, and that's fine. You can have flexibility and be fulfilled working for somebody because they have a great culture. I mean, there's tons of companies that can fulfill you. There's no problem with that. But like something like side hustle and that whole movement of what do you do after hours so that you don't want to be employed for very long, like that's something I'm really passionate about, where find your niche. Like, what are you exceptional at? And even just look at your everyday life and everyday conversations. What do people ask you for? Like, what are you an expert in? All that stuff. Start a blog. Start doing something today that will then allow you to work toward slowly pushing that employment out, if that's your goal, and then building that freedom and flexibility. And there's so many components to it, but building a side hustle and really focusing on what needs to get done so that you can reach that as a goal is like, that's starting today. And I use the example of like, if you are just a music whiz and you know everything about music, and people ask you for music recommendations, like think about how to monetize that. You are actually becoming like a Spotify in your brain, and people pay for that for many reasons other than just recommendations. But like when you have that conversation with the human, you're obviously not going to ask them for money, but like think about then what businesses can be worked around that expertise. And there's so many, and you see a lot of people taking advantage of the low barriers of entry to starting a business. And I think people just need to realize that starting today is probably the thing that they need to remind themselves of, because there are no barriers to entry, and truly the internet allows us to do what we need to do to get to that point. So if your goal is to have a flexibility and work remotely and do your own thing, do it today. I mean, I think starting your own website, for example, and then letting conversations play out based on like who you are is the best way to do that. And that starts with Facebook posts and just like having your own voice. And maybe you talk about politics, maybe you talk about fast food. It doesn't really matter, but you'll slowly become a conversation point, and then there's a way to monetize that later on. So yeah, I mean, I could talk for hours about all that, but it really depends on what you are good at too. There's certain job types that don't lend themselves to the ability to be flexible. So for those people, you really need to capitalize on the vacation time that you're given. And that would just mean make a list of where you want to travel to and slowly think about the rest of your life, nailing that bucket list over time. You have to be a little more patient, but do it right. If you have 2 weeks off, don't call in sick throughout the year just because you have a slight headache, because you realize that that day is then going to be eaten from or taken from your vacation time. So you need to make that sacrifice and just do those 2 weeks right. Or maybe there's even the trick I see a lot of people do where they'll work extra prior to a vacation and they'll try and elongate their trip, or they'll take a sabbatical. And if you have the ability to do that, as long as you know where you're going and you take those journeys seriously and you plan them out correctly, you can get a good taste of this lifestyle, and then kind of pivot from there of what you want to turn your life into.
Yeah, awesome. I think that's all really good advice. And a lot of that we've heard individually from other people we've interviewed too, where we've interviewed people who have taken sabbaticals, interviewed people who try to pack all their work into 3 weeks so that they can take the last week of the month off. And then, of course, people who are capitalizing on their expertise and trying to, make some money for travel that way. So I think definitely covered a lot there, and there's something for everybody probably.
Yeah. And there's a good book Chris Gillibo wrote called Side Hustle. That's why I use that term. That I think if anybody's kind of locked into a job that either they love or they feel like they cannot get out of, he has good tips on how to start a kind of after the fact, after the 9 to 5, lifestyle job, so that you can make not only side income but maybe turn that into something full time.
Cool. So, just to wrap up, do you have any sort of, projects or social media or anything you would like to plug?
Well, I'm at Logan Lenz pretty much everywhere on the web, because I think there's only like one other Logan Lenz in the world, and I'm always the first adopter of all the spots. So you can find me there. I'm also loganlenz.com. I'm very accepting of any questions and feedback. So if you have any reason to contact me or pitch me on anything, you can go to the website or just email me. I'm loganlenz@gmail.com. It's not hard to figure out. And then as for what I'm working on, I'm just going to keep trucking along on some of these ventures, but there is something I'm going to unveil pretty soon with HR technology, as well as I've been writing a lot, and there is an imminent book being released, which I'll probably digress a bit here to not mention too much of, but just be on the lookout for that. Maybe I'll even come back on the show, depending on how, because we might be like 6 months out, I don't know, but certainly I'd want to talk about some of those things, because it's going to be about fulfillment and being valuable to others. So a lot of the stuff we talk about
that'd
today.
be great.
Yeah, please let us know when it comes out.
Yeah, so we just kind of closed the deal on it, and there's just a lot of content. It's just going to be a hell of a process trying to organize it and put it into something that is enjoyable for people to read.
Cool. So before we go, is there anything that we didn't ask that you want to get out there?
No, I think this is certainly a good conversation, almost exhaustive on some of the key elements to, especially traveling with kids. But I think, I'm sure you mention it a lot on your show, and I would be somewhat remiss to not just emphasize how much travel can change you. Like, I just came back from Norway, and the inspiration, like the levels of like just clean slate, clear mind, it just changes. It's almost indescribable in a way, and that's why I'm kind of like struggling to say it, but you become a different person almost, and I think I'll leave it at that. And it just makes my work a lot better, and it makes me have a different perspective on the way I do things. And I think as I compound different journeys throughout my life, I'm going to be 50, and then that feeling is going to be so amplified that I can't even imagine how I'm going to feel. So, I think that's really the reason we travel and the reason we talk about stuff like this. So if you don't get to experience it, and or you don't even feel this feeling, maybe I'm doing something different. I'm happy to talk about it, but like that's really why we do this, and I think that's it's an amazing feeling. So that's it.
Yeah, that is so true.
All right, well, I guess that's all the questions we had for you. Thanks again so much for joining. And yeah, like you said, whenever your book comes out or it's, ready to come out, just let us know. And we'll either, have to have you back on to talk about it and talk about the subject of the book, or at very least just announce it to everybody.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'd appreciate that. I'll certainly let you know, and I'll send you guys copies, of course, depending on where you are in the world at that time.
Cool.
Oh, that's too kind.
All right, so I hope everybody enjoyed that interview with Logan Lenz and learned a thing or two. I know I did. I loved hearing about his entrepreneurship and his philosophy on work. And, I loved hearing about how extensively he's traveled with his kids and, getting tips and tricks on that. So be sure to follow Logan and, reach out and contact him or read his blogs, any of that good stuff on loganlenz.com. And I think he also said he was at Logan Lenz on basically everything. So you can find him on Twitter and Facebook, all that good stuff. And while you're at it, be sure to give Thinking Liberty a like and a follow over there. So we are at ListenTL on both Facebook and Twitter. So be sure to look us up there. And then there'll be some information in the show notes page. Maybe you heard something during the interview and you weren't really sure what it was, or you didn't quite catch it. And you can find all that at thinkingliberty.com/23. That's where all the show notes will be. And while you're there, be sure to make sure you're subscribed to the show. We have links in the sidebar there to subscribe on whatever platform you could possibly want to listen to this show on. So be sure to check that out. And I guess that's it for this week. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Thinking Liberty. Subscribe to the show for free on iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher at thinkingliberty.com. You'll also find detailed show notes pages, articles by Zach and Sarah, and more. We'll see you next time.